Have you ever noticed how some people possess an almost magnetic presence, how they shift the entire energy of a room without uttering a single word? They don't raise their voices, they don't plead, they don't argue. They simply pull back. And the atmosphere changes. People suddenly feel the void, the silence, the absence, and they begin to react. They question, they chase, they sense something has shifted. Now imagine what would happen if you did the same. If, instead of responding instantly to every message, every demand, every emotion, you paused. If you chose stillness over impulse, silence over explanation, space over confrontation. That, right there, is the beginning of a deeper power, the kind of power that doesn't shout but transforms everything around it just by being. You see, most of us are trained, conditioned, to be constantly available. Emotionally, physically, mentally. We say yes when we're screaming no inside. We answer questions we were never obligated to. We respond out of habit, not clarity. And all the while, we think we're being kind, helpful, reliable. But what we're really doing is leaking. Leaking energy. Leaking presence. Leaking ourselves into spaces and relationships that do not deserve us. And people get used to it. They learn your buttons. Your triggers. Your weaknesses. They know you'll answer that call. Reply to that message. Explain yourself again and again. They know you'll jump to fix, to soothe, to validate. Not because they truly value you, but because they've grown dependent on the version of you that never says no. But something changes when you stop being predictable. When you choose to become a little distant. A little more observant. A little more protective of your energy. Suddenly, those who thought they knew you are forced to admit they never really did. They panic, not because you've harmed them, but because you've stopped being available for their convenience. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves." Think about that. When your silence begins to irritate someone, when your boundaries provoke confusion or even anger, it's not a reflection of your wrongdoing, it's a mirror to their dependence on your compliance. And when people try to pull you back into your old patterns, when they push just to get a reaction, it reveals far more about their control than about your character. So ask yourself, how many times have you said yes just to avoid discomfort? How many times have you kept giving to people who never truly gave back? How often do you sacrifice your peace just to maintain someone else's comfort? And how many pieces of yourself have you handed away, day after day, until you no longer recognize the person staring back at you in the mirror? We are not taught to preserve ourselves. We are taught to be agreeable, available, accommodating. From childhood, we are told that our value lies in how much we do for others. That saying no is selfish. That being unavailable is rude. But here's a truth they never told you: excessive availability is not kindness. It's surrender. And it is often exploited by those who take but never give, who love your energy but not your soul. There comes a point where you must reclaim yourself. Not to spite the world, but to finally be whole within it. This is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming your full, authentic self. It doesn't happen in noise. It happens in silence. It doesn't bloom in crowds. It blooms in solitude. When you retreat, not to escape, but to listen to yourself, you begin to find what was buried under all the performing, pleasing, and proving. Because real power doesn't flinch. It doesn't argue. It doesn't need to convince. Real power simply exists. It is felt in the quietest presence. It radiates from those who no longer need to defend their worth or beg for respect. It shines in those who know when to walk away, not out of weakness, but out of clarity. So here's a challenge: look at your life. Look at who drains you. Look at the moments when your energy disappears. Look at the messages you answer when your soul is exhausted. Look at the explanations you give just to feel understood. And then ask, why? Why do I feel the need to explain myself so often? Why do I react so quickly? Why am I still performing for people who wouldn't notice if I disappeared? Jung believed our psyche is not just a system of reactions but of energy. Every emotion, every thought, every action takes something from you. Your energy is a currency, and you're spending it constantly. When you defend yourself against petty criticisms, when you argue just to prove a point, when you respond to every provocation, you are spending that currency on what doesn't return any value. And slowly, piece by piece, you are drained. And the world notices. It sees you tired, stretched thin, barely holding yourself together. And rather than protect you, it pushes more. Because people who lack boundaries are often seen as tools, not treasures. Emotional vending machines. Push a button, get a response. But you're not a machine. You're a soul. And that soul deserves care, rest, and protection. The hard truth. The more available you are, the less people value you. What is always within reach is taken for granted. What is always ready to give becomes invisible. And the cruelest part? You don't even notice it happening. You just wonder why you feel so empty. So tired. So unseen. But all of that can change. It starts the moment you pause. The moment you stop reacting. The moment you choose silence. When you begin to ask not, what do they need from me, but, what do I need from me? When you begin to protect your presence like it's sacred, because it is. You owe no one constant access. You owe no one your peace. And the moment you begin to guard your energy, the world around you will shift. Some people will resist. Some will call you selfish. Some will leave. Let them. Because what's leaving is not love, it's dependence. And what's being born in its place is strength. Wholeness. You. This isn't about disappearing. It's about reappearing, as your truest self. And that self is no longer available on demand. How many hours of your life have you spent replaying old conversations, thinking of what you should have said, wondering why someone treated you the way they did? You're not just thinking, you're draining yourself. You're investing energy in shadows, feeding the ghosts of moments that should have long been buried. These aren't harmless thoughts. This is psychic energy, your most valuable resource, being spent on battles that don't even exist anymore, on people who've moved on while you're still bleeding over what they did. Energy, when preserved, becomes power. It forms presence. That quiet, magnetic force you see in certain people, the ability to walk into a room and command attention without speaking a word, doesn't come from charm. It comes from containment. From protecting one's own energy so fiercely that people feel it without needing to hear it. But when that same energy is spilled through every reaction, every explanation, every emotional outburst, you become hollow. You fade. You become reactive, fragile, easily manipulated, and the world shows no mercy for people who hand themselves over that easily. You have to start noticing the patterns. The triggers. The subtle traps. What makes you tense up? What makes you instantly defend yourself or jump into explanations no one asked for? Those exact points, those are the holes where your energy leaks. That's where your work begins. Not to become cold or numb, but to become aware. To be selective. To reclaim your sovereignty. Because when you protect your energy, you disrupt the very projections others have placed on you. And this is where things start to get uncomfortable, not for you, but for them. You're now stepping into a darker part of the human experience, the realm of silent manipulation. Those who once fed on your emotional reactions won't like what happens next. Because your unavailability doesn't just create distance, it disarms their control. These people never had to shout or force anything. They just had to press your emotional buttons, the ones you left exposed, and you'd respond like clockwork. Every time. Carl Jung called this projection, a psychological reflex where people displace their own suppressed traits onto others. But there's another, often overlooked side, you becoming the receptacle for those projections. The more emotionally open and available you are, the more people unconsciously use you as a screen for their own unacknowledged pain, guilt, and fear. The friend who only calls when they're in trouble, the partner who collapses when you stop fixing them, the person who flatters you until you're no longer useful, these dynamics are not coincidences. They're built on your agreement to play a role. And why do you keep playing it? Because deep down, you're terrified. Terrified of disappointing someone. Of not being needed. Of being left behind. The most powerful manipulations don't come in the form of threats. They come in guilt. In silence. In the subtle feeling that you owe someone something. That you should stay. That you must respond. That you're a bad person if you don't. But here's the truth, the manipulator doesn't need to control you, they only need you to keep reacting the same way. Keep feeding the cycle. Keep giving in. As long as you do, they win. But the moment you stop, the entire system begins to collapse. The moment you say no without explaining. The moment you don't respond. The moment you walk away instead of trying to make them understand. That's when it all shifts. Because their illusion of you, crafted over time through their own projections, begins to break apart. The mask they put on you falls. And they're left staring at someone they don't recognize. And worse than that, they're forced to look at themselves. Not everyone is ready for that. That's when the criticism starts. The drama. The accusations. Not because you've done something wrong, but because you've stopped playing a role that kept their own darkness hidden. Your unavailability doesn't make you cruel. It forces others to confront their own voids. Your silence doesn't harm, it reveals. It reveals the noise within them that they've long avoided. It strips them of their narrative control. And for people who've built their identities on controlling yours, this is unbearable. Jung once said, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That means true transformation doesn't come from wishful thinking. It comes when you withdraw. When you stop feeding toxic dynamics. When you stop enabling patterns that drain you. That's when the shadow, the part of others they refuse to see, emerges. And that emergence often turns them against you. Not because you hurt them, but because you stopped letting them hide behind you. But what about you? Are you prepared to be misunderstood? To be called selfish, distant, arrogant? Are you strong enough to be hated for choosing peace? Because silence has consequences. It invites rejection. It brings solitude. But within that solitude lies something greater than approval, your own voice. In that silence, you will meet yourself. Not the version of you that performed for others, but the one that simply exists, complete, undivided, untouched by the needs of the world. That's where real power lives. And yes, it costs something. You'll lose people who were never really with you. You'll disappoint expectations that were built on your silence. You'll be seen differently. But being seen clearly is always better than being loved for a lie. In today's world, where everyone is talking, debating, proving, and reacting, silence is a rebellion. Not the silence of fear, but of clarity. Of intention. Of power. The kind of silence that listens more than it speaks. The kind that watches, discerns, chooses when to act and when to let things pass. This is not passivity, it's wisdom. Jung didn't see silence as emptiness. He saw it as a vessel, a fertile ground for inner transformation. When you become silent, you don't retreat. You rise. You start seeing things clearly. The manipulation. The repetition. The energy drains. You stop playing roles that exhaust you. And you begin to move with purpose. With stillness. With restraint. People will panic when you don't react. They'll accuse you of changing. And you have. You've stopped being emotionally edible. You're no longer their coping mechanism. You no longer play the character they assigned you. That's not betrayal. That's liberation. The fewer words you speak, the more each one matters. As you mature, you become selective, not just with your time or your presence, but with your truth. Because you realize that not everyone deserves access to it. Silence becomes your armor. Your boundary. Your language. Not because you're withholding, but because you've learned the sacredness of your own energy. And here's the final truth: silence doesn't just disturb others, it heals you. It rebuilds you from within. It detaches you from the chaos of validation. It reconnects you to your core. That is where the transformation begins. In the silence that no one hears but you. In the quiet decision to no longer explain. No longer beg. No longer chase. Just be. Present. Whole. Unavailable for anything that costs your peace. Because the most dangerous person is not the loudest one. It's the one who no longer needs to react. The one who chooses when, how, and if they speak. The one who knows that silence isn't absence. It's command. It's only when you create a space free from the constant noise and demands of others that you start to feel your energy returning to you, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. In that stillness, you don't just rest, you begin to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. But simply removing the outer chaos isn't enough. The real work is learning how to protect, direct, and honor your energy. It means choosing with clarity where your time, your presence, and your emotions go, and just as importantly, where they never should. This is not about building walls, it's about recognizing that your soul is sacred. And not everyone should have access to it. If you're in the middle of reclaiming your energy and learning to set boundaries, this is your season of change. But change doesn't happen just because you understand something intellectually. You can nod along, agree with every word, feel it in your bones, and still go back to saying yes when your spirit is screaming no, still answering messages you dread, still engaging in empty conversations that drain you, still holding on to relationships that died long ago out of nothing but habit and fear. That's not awareness. That's self-deception in disguise. True transformation begins the moment you choose, with conviction, to stop living on autopilot. And that takes discipline, emotional discipline. Conscious unavailability is not coldness. It's not cruelty. It's not arrogance. It's simply you taking your power back. It's deciding you will no longer be a 24/7 emotional resource for anyone who calls, texts, or demands a piece of you. It's you choosing yourself, not once, not sometimes, but consistently. It begins in small but powerful ways, not answering immediately, taking a breath before responding, walking away from drama instead of being pulled into it, turning off your phone without guilt, saying, "Not today, I'm not interested," or simply, "I won't be getting involved." And here's something most people struggle with: you don't need to explain any of that. Your silence is not an apology. You owe no justifications for your peace. But to those who relied on your availability, who built comfort around your constant yes, your refusal to explain will feel like a threat. Because now you're not playing the role anymore, the kind, understanding, endlessly giving version of you they grew to depend on. You've stepped off their emotional stage, and now they're left with their own mess. Carl Jung knew this well. He understood that every journey into becoming your real self requires a period of isolation. But not isolation rooted in sadness, it's a sacred pause, a time to hear your own voice clearly again, without the background noise of expectations and approval. Want to know if you're growing? Watch who starts pulling away when you begin to protect your energy. Pay attention to who gets upset when you stop reacting. Observe who accuses you of changing when you finally start choosing peace over pleasing. These are not signs of failure. These are signs that you're no longer playing along in someone else's emotional theater. At first, this new version of you will feel strange. You'll wrestle with guilt. You'll wonder if you've become selfish. You might even hear that you've changed too much. And in a way, they're right, you have changed. You've stopped making yourself available for emotional labor that leaves you empty. You've stopped confusing being needed with being loved. You've stopped saying yes just to avoid discomfort. That discomfort is part of your awakening. You've spent your entire life putting yourself second, shrinking, pleasing, apologizing. Of course it feels uncomfortable to suddenly say no. But conscious unavailability is the bedrock of true self-respect. Every time you say no to something that drains you, you're saying yes to your well-being. Every time you step away from chaos, you're declaring your peace to be priceless. And every time you refuse to explain your boundaries, you're shifting the dynamic. You're teaching people that access to you is not guaranteed, it's earned. And that shift, it's seismic. Because some people won't just be confused, they'll be offended. Why? Because your emotional absence reveals something painful to them, how much they were relying on your constant reaction to feel in control. Your silence leaves them face to face with their own emotional void. And instead of sitting with it, they'll blame you. They'll lash out. They'll try to guilt you back into the old pattern. But the pattern is over. You're no longer available for emotional games disguised as affection. And yes, the separation will hurt. You'll feel the pain of the rupture. The loneliness of walking away. The fear that maybe you've made a mistake. But you haven't lost anything real. What you've lost is the illusion that you had to shrink to be loved. What you've shed is the role that kept you small. And what you've gained is space, precious, sacred space, for your soul to breathe. Because what happens after that? After the silence, the solitude, the confusion? Clarity comes. Peace comes. Presence comes. And not the presence that bends to fit in. The kind of presence that stands rooted, still, and whole. That looks in the mirror and sees a person no longer performing for acceptance, but simply existing in truth. Jung spoke of individuation as walking away from the collective, disidentifying from the mask, and it's exactly that. You're not abandoning people. You're returning to yourself. That's the moment you stop being reactive and start becoming a creator. You are no longer molded by situations, you begin molding them. The people who once thrived on your availability won't know what to do with you now. Because you don't fit their script anymore. You're not reacting. You're not saving them. You're not explaining. That's not cruelty. That's freedom. Yes, you will lose people. But you will find your power. You will leave certain circles, but you will rediscover your essence. You will no longer be easy to understand, but you will finally be respected. Because what is always available becomes forgettable. But what is rare becomes sacred. This is rebirth. A new chapter where you're no longer available for emotional crumbs, for shallow conversations, for relationships that only survive through your self-betrayal. Now, you only say yes to what echoes peace, what feels like truth, what honors your wholeness. And if you've made it this far, that means something inside you is already shifting. That part of you that's exhausted from carrying everyone else is ready to put itself first, not out of selfishness, but survival. Because being loved at the cost of your self-worth isn't love at all. This is where self-love begins. When you choose yourself, even when it costs you. Even when it means being misunderstood. Even when it means being alone, for a while. Because you're not truly alone. You're finally with yourself. So now ask yourself, are you ready? Are you willing to be rejected, labeled, or even hated in order to live as your most honest, peaceful self? Are you ready to stop abandoning yourself to belong? If this speaks to you, if it awakens something inside, then say it out loud, or write it in the comments, I choose my peace. Let the world adjust. Or not. You're not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to be whole.